The East African tradition of the Maasai tribe is to greet one another with the words Kasirian Ngera, which is Swahili for, so how are the children? In that community, the well-being of their children is the highest priority. If you are interested in participating in thought-provoking conversations about the well-being of children and families, please tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on 860 AM WNOV. Together, we can save our children.
You're listening to Fresh Start Today. Your host for the show today, as always, is Mr. Jermaine Reed and Mr. Sean Roby. And we are glad that you are tuned in this afternoon. We have a great program lined up for you. A couple things we want to talk about. And if you'd like to join into the conversation, you can call 414-444-5250. 414-444-5250. You all know that this program is attached to Fresh Start Family Services, which is an African-American owned and operated treatment foster care agency here in Milwaukee. We've been around approaching our, I think it's been 13 years now. It's been a while, but we are out here on the front line and trying to educate our community about issues that definitely impact African-American children and families as it relates to child welfare and foster care services. And so it is our pleasure to come in every week on Wednesday afternoon to talk with you all. But again, the key word there is talk with you all, not talk to you all. So make sure you pick up the phone today and give us a call. Let us know that the time and energy that we put into producing these shows are of value to you all, that you are learning things that perhaps you didn't know about the child welfare system, about foster care, and just a lot of other issues. It'd be great to hear those things. We got to know that this program matters and means a lot. Today, on the show, we'll be talking about parenting a child with reactive attachment disorder. Now, I know some folk probably thought I was coming in with my gloves on and all that kind of stuff, but we can't fight every week. You know, we just got to be able to get information out. But I understand you all's passion. I understand that what's happening in child welfare and foster care is impacting our community in a very intimate way. Probably to a degree that it's not impacting other communities, but we just want to have a variety of issues to present. And today we're going to be talking about a disorder called reactive attachment disorder. And perhaps you'll hear something that you say, wow, I can connect with that. Or maybe that is something that my child is dealing with, or my foster child is dealing with, my adoptive child is dealing with, nephew, niece, grandchild is dealing with. And so that's what this is about. It's about information. And we have to have these conversations. But before we have our guests call us from the Institute for Attachment and Child Development out in Colorado, Mr. Forrest Lean, I'm just going to make a couple community announcements. One is that the Partnership Council meeting, you all may have remembered me mentioning that on last week, but the Partnership Council is going to be convening this Friday, the 29th of January at the Division of Milwaukee Child Protective Services Office. Now, you know the DMCPS was formerly the Bureau of Milwaukee Child Welfare. Well, there is a citizen review panel that gets together, and they are supposed to hold systems accountable, make recommendations. They don't have the power to enforce anything, but they can make recommendations. Listen to the words that I'm saying, recommendations versus enforcing anything. But it'll be interesting if you all, the community, the public, can, carve out some time in your schedule to show up at the Partnership Council. And that address to the Partnership Council is 635 North 26th Street. That's right off of 26th and Wisconsin Avenue. And again, that's Milwaukee Child Welfare Partnership Council from noon until 2 o'clock p.m. From noon until 2 o'clock p.m. The other thing is,
I think to add to that, if you have any questions regarding the actual location or how to get there or the best way to get there, you can give them a call directly.
Everybody know what 26 in Wisconsin is. Everybody know what 26 in Wisconsin. Who don't know what 26 in Wisconsin?
Hey, you never know. That phone number is 414-343-5500.
Got you. All right, and then the other thing is that tomorrow is Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and the Human Trafficking Task Force of Greater Milwaukee will present a community response Prostituted Prevention and Hope, January 28th, 5:30 p.m. live music. 6 p.m. is the program. The location is 889-220 East Pittsburgh Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And if you have any questions, feel free to give Dana World Patterson a call over at 414-368-0455. 414-368-0455. The Colored Child Welfare Conference, the only conference in the state of Wisconsin that convenes to solely address the needs of minority children in foster care. Our agency is so proud that we are sponsoring that event. Our celebrated theme this year is Against All Odds, From Foster Care to Success. We have a number of successful individuals who were formerly in foster care that will be presenting, from judges to authors to educators, nurses, politicians, etc. Some of these individuals you'll be familiar with. They're both locally and nationally known. And so if you like information about the Colored Child Welfare and you would like to participate, you can call 414-351-1100, 414-351-1100, extension 150. Some of those topics that we're going to be exploring include black single mothers and the child welfare system, the journey of black children in foster care from total exclusion to over-inclusion, improving educational outcomes for children in foster care. We're also going to look at Wisconsin foster children psychotropic medication usage oversight. One other really interesting topic will be helping foster and adoptive children deal with grief and separation loss, and dispelling the Jezebel myth, understanding the historical roots of systematic sexual exploitation and trafficking of girls and women of color. So that's going to be a great conference on May 17th. You definitely want to get registered. And then the last thing we have is a friend of ours who will be presenting at the conference, Dr. Stacey Patterson. She's writing a second book called Spare the Kids, Why Whooping Black Children Won't Save America. And she's looking for two groups to interview. The first group is 6 or 7 mothers who lost their children to the foster care system because of substantiated child abuse related to physical discipline. The other group is she's looking for 3 or 4 mothers or fathers who may have, as a result of disciplining, have killed their child. I know that's a really tough pill to swallow, but those things do happen. And she just simply wants to talk with them, let them tell their story. It'll be included in her book. She'll make sure that identity is protected. And then also, too, there is a stipend that is available. And if you want more information, you can give me a call at 414-351-1100, 414-351-1100, extension 150. So we have our guest on the phone line, Mr. Forrest Lean from the Institute for Attachment in Child Development. Good afternoon, Forrest. How are you doing?
Doing great.
Hey, welcome to Fresh Start Today. We are thankful that you're able to carve this time out in your schedule. I know you're very busy and you're actually on a different coast. So thank you for calling in. And we have a lot of folks who listen to this program. Many of these individuals are foster parents. Others are just parents, birth, adoptive parents, foster parents who tune in, child welfare professionals, judicial folks. So that's our target audience for today. And I think it was really important for us to have a conversation around the certain dynamics of parenting a child who has reactive attachment disorder. So again, thank you for being part of the show today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so hopefully in our forum today, Forrest, we're going to be able to help our audience understand the difference between an attachment disorder and reactive attachment disorder, some of the causes, symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment for what we call RAD, or reactive attachment disorder, the population most impacted by RAD, look at common challenges that parents face when parenting a child with this disorder. And then if you can, please talk about the narcissistic wound and the primal wound in children and adults. And lastly, identify what parents can do to promote healthy attachment and bonding in infants and children. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
Okay, so,
go ahead.
Let me say this. Science is just now catching up to what we've all have known for years. Anybody that's parenting a child knows that touch and talking to a child in a healthy way is beneficial. It's conducive to healthy child development. But I guess, science just caught up, and there's a lot of research, evidence-based research now that's out there, a lot of funding attached to that. But we've been knowing it, right, Horace?
Yes.
Oh, Forrest, okay. So tell me, Forrest, can can you introduce who you are, what is that you do, and then define for us what is the difference between an attachment disorder and reactive attachment disorder?
Well, I run a clinic here in Colorado that treats children that suffer from attachment disorder, and most of the kids that we work with are adopted kids who are now facing disruption in their families.
Okay.
We work with some kids, all the kids that are adopted either came from orphanages or are foster care system in the United States. So these kids were, adopted out of the system, go into families and are struggling big time. So we're trying to prevent the disruption in the adoptive homes. We also are working with the state of Wyoming in a paradigm shift in how to change how foster care is done from the very first CPS referral. So we're going to try to prevent attachment disorder from being created, because when kids are moved all over the place when they're little, the system actually creates attachment disorder, not on purpose, but just out of a broken system that really isn't helping birth families and helping kids stay together. And so we're really excited about that project going on up there. So I've been doing this 36 years. This isn't something I learned in graduate school. They really weren't teaching it then, and they're really not teaching it now, other than it's out there. This is what it is, but really not training clinicians how to work with it. So over these 36 years working with kids in foster care and adoption, developed a program that's very effective in working with these kids.
So something you said that just jumped out at me, Forrest, and I want you to talk about it a little bit further if you can, that how the foster care system can inadvertently, not intentionally, but inadvertently can sometimes cause trauma to children.
Sure. Let me explain a little bit, though, about how attachment disorder is created, and that'll give a foundation for the rest of our discussion today.
Gotcha.
If we look at the normal developmental stages that all kids from all cultures all over the world need in order to develop appropriately, Erik Erikson really is the best place to read about those stages. But if we look at the first 3 years of life, which is when attachment disorder is created out of a developmental disruption, which also, by the way, Bessel van der Kolk, who's an MD and he's the big international trauma expert, identifies attachment disorder the same way I do, is that children don't develop a conscience out of their needs because they're hurt in that first year of life. Erikson described it as trust versus mistrust. So in other words, you have needs, and when that baby has needs and you have a parent that's not there to meet their needs, and kids are hit or they're neglected in some way, they do not develop a level of trust in caregivers. And so if those kids are still in dysfunction and they move into their toddler stages, which is the stage of autonomy versus shame, guilt, and doubt. In other words, limits and rules, because little kids, want their way all the time. And so if you have an infant then that is in a foster home or a relative home or whatever during that time, they aren't letting that parent in to guide them and direct them. They're more in that I want my way all the time, and they'll go to extremes to really keep people from being in control of them, because out of the most vulnerable time in their life, they were hurt the most. And so we really have to understand the developmental stages. Even though kids don't remember their trauma, their brains get hardwired in trauma, fear-based trauma of fight, flight, or freeze. And so the brain stays locked into that kind of PTSD place. So as they get older in age, they're still stuck in that don't let anybody in, always control your environment, go after your own needs, don't let anybody be in control or guide you, and when you're told no, you will do whatever to try to get your way. So that's really that narcissistic origination of personality where as they get older, they're still stuck in that self-centered, narcissistic, I want my way all the time. So that's kind of the foundation of attachment disorder. So getting back to your question about being in the foster care system, let's just take a prime example. There's a report of neglect, and let's say the child is, a year of age. They go into the system for protection because the child is, hurt in some way or physically bruised, so they're there to protect that child, so they put him in a temporary place while they're trying to figure out what's going on. And then the system has a rule that you have to reunify kids back in their birth family. And I think because the system is so overworked and overloaded, you have treatment plans that really aren't treating the core problem, which is usually you have birth parents that hurt their kids or they're addicts or whatever, that there isn't anyone really connecting with those folks to help them turn their life around. You're just kind of having a token treatment plan, and so nothing's changing in that original family setting. So kids are going back for visits, they're being placed back home, something hasn't changed, now they're coming back into the system again, and I call it the revolving door. Kids are being bounced back and forth in a system that really hasn't been treated effectively in order to keep kids back in their birth families. So, that's what happens. If you look at histories, a lot of these kids, by the time they're finally adopted, they've been in, 10, 12 placements before they go into a permanent home, or they figure out a relative that they can go back to or whatever. So that's how the system helps create the disorder.
And how does being in multiple placements like you just described, how does that impact relationships, especially around attachment for a child?
Well, children get used to their environment, and if their environment feels safe and calm, they, will settle in there. But, say they go into that first foster family for safety and they feel safe and they settle in and they start to let down their guard again, and then they're moved to a different place. So how many times does it take, even for little kids, where they're moved around to different environments, different temperaments, different ways to deal with them, where they say, I'm not going to let anybody in or allow myself to be vulnerable. So those moves affects the adjustments of kids because, little kids just want a safe environment where they don't have to get worried about anything. But, they move to one family where they're the only kid, and then they go to another family where there's 5 or 6 kids and they're not paid attention to. So those moves all over the place affect their ability to trust and attach.
So let me ask you this, because we're going to be taking a break in about a minute. With reactive attachment disorder, a child who has that, and let's just say they are in a natural family, because I'm assuming that a child can have RAD in a birth family home environment, correct?
Sure.
And if so, if that parent has multiple children, say 5 or 6 children, how does that RAD child get their needs met?
Well, I grew up in a family with 7 kids. My mom, they were all one after the other, and she did the best she can to take care of all of us. So that environment was very safe, even though I may not have gotten the same attention as, an only child, for example. So kids have a pretty resilient state about them. As long as it's safe and it's not a scary environment and, they're getting fed and they're getting held, they'll be fine.
Okay.
So that's really not an issue there because kids are very resilient. It's that consistent, dysfunction in the environment. Because if we look at the brain, which is the big move now, which I'm thankful for, is that we're recognizing post-traumatic stress disorder in children that have early trauma. So the brain, really the way the brain works is that the feeling part of the brain when we're born is fully developed. We can feel mad, sad, glad, scared feelings, but the cortex isn't fully developed till our mid-20s. So if you have a child then that has these primitive feelings, they don't know what to do with them, they count on the environment to be their cortex, the doing part of the brain that's underdeveloped. So when a baby cries, a parent picks them up, makes them feel safe, connected, all of that. So the brain stays calm and develops normally. If there's a scary situation, a baby's crying, and let's say they live in an attic kind of environment where they're turning up the stereo or they're slamming the door shut or they're shaking the baby to say shut up, the cortisol in the brain, the stress hormone kicks in, and it creates a disconnect between the feeling part of the brain and the doing part of the brain. So babies go into a primitive fight, flight, or freeze, which is numb out. Don't cry, because if I cry, I'll get hurt. So their brains are getting hardwired in this survival kind of strategy, just in a primitive way.
So
then, go ahead.
So I'm thinking about that piece you're talking about with the baby, because they've been hurt or they've been ignored and they're quiet because they don't want to get hurt. And say that
Right.
child is placed in a foster home that I have, and they say, oh, this baby is just so quiet and such a nice, calm baby. We think that that's good behavior. But
Well, it could be, and it could be just, I'm going to numb out and hopefully no one touches me.
Gotcha. Wow.
We see that in Eastern European orphanages where kids are just left laying on their backs. Bottles are stuck up on the side of the crib. They're self-feeding. They're rocking in their crib, head banging against. They are self-stimulating, self-feeding, and no one's touching them or picking them up. In fact, the picking children up should be the most calm, safe connection with human beings. That a caretaker picks me up. Doesn't even matter if my pants are full or I'm hungry. The touch and the calmness makes me calm down immediately.
Gotcha. We need to take a break, Forrest. We'll be right back, and if you can define when we come back from break what attachment disorder is, and then go into what some of the causes are. We'll be right back to Fresh Start Today.
This is Jermaine reporting from Fresh Start's WBCM, Wisconsin Black Children Matter. Did you know that the number of black children in Milwaukee's foster care community continues to rise? According to the Department of Children and Families' most recent annual report, black children made up 68.2% of Milwaukee's foster kids. Many of these children are not only removed from their family and siblings, but are placed in families and communities that do not reflect or honor their race, culture, or heritage. Fresh Start is an agency that is committed to serving and advocating for black children. In order to meet the needs of this growing population, we need more black families in the Milwaukee area that love and celebrate black children. To become a licensed, culturally responsive foster parent with Fresh Start, you must be 21 years old, married or single with a stable income, clear several criminal background checks, and complete 36 hours of pre-licensing training. To learn more about other qualifications, call 414-351-1100. That's 414-351-1100. Again, this is Jermaine reporting from Fresh Start, WBCM, Wisconsin Black Children Matter.
Good afternoon. You're tuned in to Fresh Start Today. It's 3:27 p.m., and we're talking about parenting a child with reactive attachment disorder, and our special guest this afternoon is Forrest Lean from the Institute of Attachment and Child Development. And we're going to be talking, this phase, we're going to be talking about what exactly is attachment disorder and what are some of the causes and symptoms. So Forrest, can you kind of enlighten us about what is attachment disorder?
In the first segment, I was starting to explain it from a developmental perspective of what it is.
Yeah.
It's that developmental disruption in the first 3 years of development. And we have a term called reactive attachment disorder, which is the definition in the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Disorders. It's actually changed recently in the most recent version of the DSM. But it's a very limited definition. So it's difficult for a clinician to really understand the problem by reading the definition in that manual. And so people in the attachment field have developed attachment disorder, which is a more detailed explanation of the problem that's really kind of beyond the definition of reactive attachment disorder, because in the DSM it just says that kids that are disrupted in their early development develop a disinhibited or inhibited list of symptoms, which is basically some kids internalize their trauma and some kids are externalizing their trauma. So their behavior is more either in your face or more withdrawn. But as far as we have a symptoms checklist. It's called the RADQ. It's 30 questions, and it takes a look at all the different symptoms of the disorder, and you measure it on a scale of 1 to 5 to determine the severity of each symptom. So all kids in foster care that have been disrupted out of their family and are in the system all have a degree of trust. They have trouble trusting in caregivers. And that continuum of distrust goes all the way up to severe symptoms where they're not let anybody into their life at all. They're very controlling. Their behavior can become very, very angry, very resistant. Lying and stealing is a big symptom. But if we think of lying and stealing is a normal behavior for a toddler because they don't have the internal barometer to know that lying and stealing is wrong. All they think about, I see it, I take it, it's mine. That's all toddlers think about. So when kids are stuck then in that developmental stage of toddlerhood, they lie and steal. And every parent that calls me says if they would just stop lying and stealing, it would sure make me happier. But if we normalize their symptoms, it makes sense because kids never develop that connection with a safe caregiver, so they didn't move beyond that developmental stage of toddlerhood, so they're still stealing and lying.
You know what, Forrest?
Go ahead.
If you don't mind, just to take a quick step back, when you talk about the inhibited versus the disinhibited, where you mentioned that some kids internalize and others externalize, and just for our listening audience, when you talk about the inhibited behavior, just for our listeners again, those are kids who are extremely withdrawn. So they'll isolate themselves and whatnot from others and in terms of their emotions, but the disinhibited child will be more very openly friendly with any and every one. So just for clarity purposes, when we talk about those two different types of RAD.
Yeah, very friendly or very angry, where they're showing their true hurt feelings in an angry way. In other words, distancing behavior. So the in-your-face, angry, charming kids are trying to create distance in relationship on their terms. The inhibited kids are just trying to have not have anyone even pay attention to them.
Right.
And
that's their survival.
You were talking about this lying behavior. Okay.
Yep.
So is this typical, normal lying behavior that we see often in children, period, or is this a different type of some pathology connected to this type of lying?
Well, oftentimes a parent will call it crazy lying. In other words, they're trying to get out of trouble, or they're trying to get relief in some way, and so they will look right at a parent and they'll lie. They'll say, I didn't do it, and they're just trying to get out of trouble, which normal kids will do also, except normal kids, bonded kids, will have hurt feelings that they've lied. Eventually that'll hurt their hearts, as we call it, because they have a conscience, they have a development, a healthy development with a parent, whereas attachment disorder kids don't. It's just survival in the moment. I need to get out of it in the moment, and I'll look right at you and lie. So they could even take a pencil right out from under your nose, and you say, hey, you took my pencil, and they'll look right at you and say, what pencil are you talking about? And they get so convincing that you think, well, I didn't even see my pencil there. That's called crazy kind of lying.
Now, when you talk about that crazy lying aspect, when you say a child who has some type of emotional connection to their parent versus a child with RAD, are you more likely to see that child who has a bond or an attachment or a more appropriate attachment come back after a while to say, yes, you know what, I did take that and I apologize, versus that RAD child who's in survival mode all the time?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep, it hurts their heart, as I called it. Or a parent can see it, a bonded child, they can see in their eyes that they're lying. They know it because they can see it in their eyes. They're in discomfort when they lie to you, whereas an attachment disorder kid won't. They'll look right at you and they're not even flinching. And
if that parent sees it in their eyes, that means that parent has to be engaged with that child, communicating with that child, having a relationship, a personable relationship with that child.
Oh, exactly.
Well, when you talk about this crazy lying, compulsive lying, some folks who are listening to this show might say, well, you know what? We don't call it pathological lying or compulsive lying or crazy lying. What we call it is that kid just sitting there lying through his teeth. So is that kind of
like a rug?
Just lying like a rug. Just lie. Everything that comes out of his mouth, just a lie. So different, I think, communities and folks, whether in foster care or in birth families, the trait may be there, but how we reference it or label it may be a little different.
Yeah, I guess I put it in the framework of entitlement. I mean,
Okay.
if you think about people that, are chronic liars and chronic thieves, they believe that they're entitled to have what you have. They don't believe that they should have to work for something or, if you think about the toddler, a toddler, normal toddlers will say, I see it, that belongs to me. But when you have someone that's 14, 15, and in their 20s, we lock them up because their internal barometer says, I'm entitled to have it. I do not have a barometer for that. That's wrong, or I shouldn't do that, or it belongs to somebody else.
Well,
that's where that conscience development, that cause and effect thinking stays stuck. So we have prisons full of these kind of personalities.
Wow. Well, let me say this, Forrest, because you bring up a very important point here when you talk about this entitlement piece. And I'm going back to the beginning of this conversation when you talked about how that foster care inadvertently can create reactive attachment or attachment disorders in children. When I'm thinking about this entitlement piece, I often think that the way foster care is structured and administered, that it creates a sense of entitlement with foster children. They're not held responsible for their actions. I don't know what your feelings are about that.
Boy, that's kind of a broad statement. I'd like to ask more questions about that.
Sure.
But, the foster care system is broken as far as, kids aren't paid attention to. As long as they're not causing problems, we just leave them in placements a lot. And so entitlement is more of a developmental stage. I'll say to kids, here's another example. I'll say to teenagers a lot that have this disorder, you have the Paris Hilton syndrome. And they'll laugh at me because they know what that is. I go, what do I mean by that? Well, she gets her way all the time. She, will have a tantrum or feels entitled that she shouldn't be held accountable or get what she wants. And I said, well, that's because kids that are spoiled in that developmental stage or they're hurt in that stage stay stuck in that entitlement. They haven't learned healthy limits and rules based out of a healthy relationship with a parent, because that's where we learn about cause and effect thinking based on limits and rules. If we trust the environment we're in, we're motivated to want to please them and do things their way. And that's where you learn how entitlement's just not something in the world that society likes or wants. And so that's where a family teaches that.
If you're listening to this show, you listen to Fresh Start today. We're talking about parenting a child with RAD. If you'd like to call 414-444-5250. If you have any questions about attachment disorder, reactive attachment disorder, call 414-444-5250.
And actually, what I was going to add to that, would another example of that be the recent case in the news of the affluenza case?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so some of the other classic symptoms, you talk about stealing and lying. What about control and superficial charm?
You bet. Superficial charm is really a skill that that these kids have, where they can, outside of their family environment, they can charm a therapist, they can charm a caseworker, they can charm their grandparents to do things their way, when in fact they don't really care about that other person. They're just trying to get their own way. So charm is a way to be in control. People like you better. But if we think about control, a lot of these symptoms have to do with control, because out of the most vulnerable time in your development, you were hurt. It makes sense that your default is to be more in control. If I'm more in control, I don't have to be vulnerable with anyone. Right. And so you can go down the line as far as charm, controlling behaviors, not getting your way and then having a tantrum, being mean to other kids in the home that are bonded to their parents because I can't do what you're doing, having friends that actually think more like you do versus bonded kids. These kids don't get invited to birthday parties and sleepovers because they're so controlling.
Right.
They have to win at games. They get really upset if they're not. They also may like to control animals because they're vulnerable, because they kind of get regard and comfort from an animal they can control. And so they would rather get their own nurturing needs met away from a parent, and using animals as a way to do that.
So do they?
If the animal then doesn't want to be around them, that the child may hurt that animal because they're resisting their control.
Is it that they establish these superficial relationships, not just with animals, but even like with coaches and teachers, case managers, or even with their clinicians or therapists, because there's a minimum level of threat there versus their primary nurturer or caregiver?
Outside the family, they're not living with them every day, and attachment disorder kids hate closeness.
Right.
And so they're most threatened by the closeness in family relationships, especially the mother figure. The mother figure is the one that gets the psychological pushback more than anybody else.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, there's been books written on it as far as the primal wound, for example.
Nancy Verrera? Yeah.
Kids lose their mothers early on, and whatever mother steps into their life, they keep them away because actually the nurturing source of mothering is what they fear the most because they were hurt the most when they were little.
Right.
So they don't let the hugs in. They don't let a mom love them. They don't let a mom, discipline them and guide them. So they push back more, and they superficially charm the dad figure if there's a dad in the home. And so dads often, I call, get chumped by these kids, where dad comes in and they try to charm dad to think that everything's okay, and mom's really upset. So there gets to be a divide between the mom and the dad over the child's behavior because they present differently to the dads than they do the moms.
And they also present differently to coaches and teachers and clinicians and case managers.
Yes, they do.
Okay.
And grandparents, too.
Even grandparents.
Right, because that direct connection is associated with that maternal figure.
Well, it's interesting you all say the maternal figure, but when you have a single-parent father that's in a nurturing role, whether that is a foster father or adoptive father or biological father, can that person also experience some of these type of behaviors from an RAD child?
Yes, because that single dad has become the nurturing enemy. Dad's trying to nurture and connect with the child. So you're right. So, but it's just that mother figures tend to be the ones that are the primary parent for a lot of these kids.
And, I think just for basic layman terms, that whole idea of trust, if the person who was supposed to protect me the most as I was very young and growing up did not do it, ultimately I'm going to walk around with my guards up against everybody all the time. And so if my guards start to get lowered because I am becoming close to somebody, I might naturally just try to push them away by sabotaging the relationship.
That was a perfect summary. Yep.
Let's look at this control piece, because control piece also leads, particularly for the foster care community, there's a connection between control and allegations as relates to the reactive attachment disorder or the child with RAD. Can you talk about that right there?
Well, false allegations are something the kids learn how to do to get people to back off. So if they're being held accountable for something, they might say, I'm going to tell so-and-so that you hit me or locked me up somewhere or whatever. So, yeah, it's a powerful way to try to be in control by getting a parent to not hold them accountable for something.
So is the control more connected? Is it more so a symptom versus the problem? Because I'm thinking the lack of feeling secure is actually the problem. But correct me if I'm wrong, because you are the attachment therapist. Help me.
Well, I mean, the circle of security is what we do for little kids.
Okay.
And so if they're not in that circle, they have to create it for themselves. The circle is just around themselves. So they don't want to let anyone else in to be vulnerable with. And it's such a common dynamic with this population of kids where they have to be in control, and they have different ways to be in control. Mm-hmm. And I could go on all day. I mean, in fact, I do all-day workshops on this topic, so I apologize. I'm trying to cram a whole bunch of information into a short period of time.
Thank you.
Well, I'm wondering, and we're going to take a break in about a minute, but I'm wondering, is there a cure for reactive attachment disorder?
If you catch kids, before they, get into that adult, superficial, now no one can tell me what to do, and actually teach them how to give up control in a safe environment, and then they practice letting safe adults be in charge of them, that would be the strategy. But kids are on a continuum of mild, moderate to severe, and so having a treatment team that creates that circle of security around them is the key. Mm-hmm. How do we pull these kids in to make them feel safe so that they don't have to be in control of their environment all the time?
All right, we're going to
take. That's what we do here at the Institute.
Well, hold on, Forrest. We're going to take a break. We'll be back probably like in a minute. And when we come back, I really want to know what tips can we give parents to help them parent a child with reactive attachment disorder. You're listening to Fresh Start Today, and we'll be right back on the other side of this break.
The East African tradition of the Maasai tribe is to greet one another with the words Kasirian Ngera, which is Swahili for, so how are the children? In that community, the well-being of their children is the highest priority. If you are interested in participating in thought-provoking conversations about the well-being of children and families, please tune in every Wednesday at 3 p.m. to Fresh Start Today on 860 AM WNOV. Together, we can save our children.
Good afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today with your host, Jermaine Reed and Sean Roby. On the line, we have Mr. Forrest Lean from the Institute for Attachment in Child Development. We're talking about parenting a child with reactive attachment disorder. According to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, most children with reactive attachment disorder have had severe problems or disruptions in their early relationships. Attachment disorders are the results of negative experiences in this early period of life, and we're talking about between that ages of birth and 3 years old. So we have Forrest Lean on the line, and before we start, it kind of is a segue into what are some parenting tips, but I really want to talk about discipline, because I think when children have certain type of behavioral patterns, Forrest, depending on which community that you're presenting to, they might feel that the rad kid is the bad kid, and the best cure for a bad kid is physical discipline. What are your thoughts with that?
Well, I think physical discipline, just feeds into their own abuse history. And I think kids will actually push you into physically hurting them, and to them, that means a relationship.
Right.
So they don't learn that the physical discipline is, corrects behavior. It just fits that they're no good and someone doesn't care about them, because I can make you so angry you're going to hit me. If we think of bonded kids, you get spanked or whatever, and a lot of parents will say, well, spanking fixed the kid. It wasn't really the spanking. It was the disappointment in their parents' eyes that was there while they're spanked. So that's more important than the actual hitting. So, with these kids, they actually then they walk away and go, I don't trust you because you're so angry with me, you hit me. And so they take it a whole different way than a bonded kid does.
And I think to add to that, one of the critical parts is whether a kid is acting out in school continuously or they're in your face and they're challenging you to do something physical. At the end of the day, I'm getting your attention. And so that's important for all providers, foster parents and whatnot to keep in mind. Kids are going to get your attention one way or the other, and it's whether they're tapping on you saying, Ma, 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 Dad, 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 or if they're doing exceptionally well in school or acting out.
Right. So all behavior is purposeful. Our key as caregivers is to try to figure out what's behind it.
Right.
So that's why, leading your question about parenting tips, I think that parents that are well-meaning, that parent these kids the same way they parented their own, or how they were parented doesn't work, so they get frustrated and angry and tired. So you really need a support group or a clinician that can help that parent validate their feelings and what doesn't work, because a lot of parents that try to parent these kids feel isolated because people don't understand what they're going through. And so like a traditional therapist really doesn't understand the behavior that the mom's telling them, plus if they do individual therapy, the kiddo's charming the therapist against the mother figure, and the therapist doesn't get it if they don't understand this disorder. So,
right.
I've been to Milwaukee several times and done trainings in the years past with different groups out there. So there are some folks in the Milwaukee area that do understand the problem. And then the other thing I want to recommend is that our website has video blogs and parents talking about this. So I think a parent that has one of these kids to go to our website and just listen to another parent that's been in their shoes talk about how it feels to try to parent one of these kiddos.
What is your website?
It's 3 W's, instituteforattachment.org. And you just go to the video blogs, and there's several on there with parents talking about it.
And you said again, www.instituteforattachment.org. And that's the number 4.
No, I'm sorry. It's FOR.
FOR, Institute for
Yep.
Attachment.
Yep. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, so let's talk about children. So some parenting. So when it comes to disciplining a child with RAD, what are some tips that you think that parents should or should not do?
Well, I guess it would be more of joining with the kids' resistance than trying to control their resistance, kind of a love and logic approach, where you're getting kids to think about their behavior versus a parent that's trying to control the behavior or react to the behavior. That would be the biggest thing. And so our parents are really, really good at not being engaged in the child's behavior or escalating with them when they get upset, because if a parent escalates with the child's behavior, then the child doesn't feel safe with that parent. Because that parent is escalating to an angry place.
Okay.
So staying calm and even-tempered is really key.
What would you say that in disciplining them that you need to be direct and succinct to the point?
You need to be direct empathically.
Okay.
Which is hard to do when you're mad. But
so what does that look like?
Is you're joining with a child's struggle, and I could give you scores of examples about some of those things, but I don't know if we don't have much time left. But I guess one prime example where a child uses foul language to create distance or make a parent mad, and so a child throws that out there, and a parent gets mad and said, "Go to your room for a month," because they're mad. That's exactly what the child wants, to create distance. So good, I made you mad, now I get to be away from you. Where our treatment is more paradoxical, where a child swears at one of our treatment parents and they say, "Sounds like you're pretty mad, and it looks like you need more time with me to learn how to respect a mom. I look forward to it." So now you have the child's head spinning on that behavior because they're not creating distance. In fact, now I get to spend more time with you than less. So we time kids in, we don't time them out.
Right.
Got you.
How might parenting a child with RAD trigger unresolved trauma in that parent's life?
Absolutely. And by the way, every parent that comes to our clinic has post-traumatic stress just living with the child. So if you come to the table with your own trauma from your own childhood, that child is a great diagnostician. They will find whatever shortcoming or trigger that you have in your psyche, and they will make it big. So whatever unresolved issues you have around that, they'll find it.
And can that possibly impact a marriage or relationship? Because I think these are things that folks don't think about, especially when there's this push for permanency, and sometimes permanency means adoption. And if you're thinking about adopting a RAD kid or a kid with this disorder, parents acquire PTSD, but there's other things that can happen as a result of a long-term commitment to parenting this type of child.
Oh, absolutely. In a two-parent situation, I don't think I've seen one case where the parents weren't split at some level by the child, where, dad's mad at mom and mom's mad at dad, and the child sits back and kind of smirks that now he's got the parents battling with each other. And so they don't want parents on the same page together. So whatever, I just had a dad call me the other day and said, I really love my foster son. I really wanted to be here, and he's a great kid. And then I talked to his mom separately, and she says, this kid, is a terrorist in my home. He does everything he can to push me away. So total different presentation. So those parents aren't on the same page, connected to each other first, the child will split them.
Wow.
So one important thing definitely to have for our providers who are listening, have a life outside of foster care.
Respite.
Right. The importance of patience and understanding that it's going to take time for this child behaviors to improve, because it didn't happen overnight, so it's not going to take one night for everything to happen.
But you know, I think also environment is really key. But if the goal is to transition many of these children back home, I mean, I don't want us to feel like it's our role to fix children, because I don't know that you can fix children, you know, who have been who are so broken, you know. How important is working with that natural home environment? And again, there are some kids who I think shouldn't be in foster care, but there's other children we have seen who have suffered an enormous amount of abuse and neglect in their birth or family setting, and ultimately the goal is, to transition them back there. What happens when you don't work with the birth parents and the birth family to address the underlying issues that cause the attachment disorder?
Well, I would hope that every child could stay with their birth parents. That would be my goal.
Right.
But like you said, if there's abuse and neglect, there's problems going on with those parents, and it doesn't start with the child. I mean, their history goes back a long ways. They are who they are based on what they didn't get in their life. And so what I would hope is that you could join with a birth parent in a way to try to help them keep their child at home and learn how to disconnect their angry triggers or behaviors that actually gets the child removed from their care. So, getting the opportunity to join with a birth parent that really wants to learn how to be a good parent and not have their child taken away, that would be the ultimate goal. But you have to have a really good clinician that is skilled at working with people that have behavior that's trauma-based behavior.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. This has been Fresh Start today, and we had a special guest, Forrest Lean from the Institute for Attachment and Child Development. And hopefully we can get you back on the show and maybe even get you into Milwaukee to provide some training to our local community around attachment disorder, RAD.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I want to say something, because we receive a lot of referrals sometimes of children who have been sexually abused across the age group, and I was listening to a program earlier today that dealt with sexual abuse in our community. And I want to say something that, there are services out here that we can connect families to, like the Healing Center at 414-671-4325, Sexual Assault Treatment Center, 414-219-5555, New Choices, 248-7533, 248-7533. We have to deal with sexual abuse trauma of children, infants, and young adults in our community. Not so much focus on who the perpetrator is, but being able to identify the profile, the traits, the grooming strategies, but also making sure we're getting services to victims and their families to deal with the trauma of sexual abuse. Until next week, be well, be warm, and be safe.